Hi, my name is Chantel, and this is part 2 of a video series that I am doing about my daughter Trinity, about myself and my family, and what we all went through when Trinity was diagnosed with JMML in January of 2006. She was 1 year old at the time. When I left off, she had just got diagnosed. She had dealt with RSV, and she went through her first time in the hospital, and she was going into the hospital for her first round of chemo after the RSV. So that's where this one picks up. I need to let you guys know though that although I kept really good notes after March of 2006, prior to that, I don't have any notes. Instead, we were doing the whole phone calls to everyone, letting them know what was going on, calling every family member, every friend, and telling the same story over and over and over again. Finally, in March, we found out about a website called caringbridge.org, and so at that time, we opened an account up for Trinity and were able to post updates on everything that was going on. And so from this point on, I'm getting my information from March anyway, I'm getting the information that I wrote down. So it's very accurate. Unfortunately, prior to that, her first round of chemo and those first times, in the hospital for her cancer, not for the RSV or any of that, but for the actual cancer, I don't have notes on. And to be totally honest with you, my memory of that isn't the greatest. The reason being is I had started to take a medication at that time for depression. After Trinity was diagnosed, I fell into a really deep depression. I had a very hard time keeping it together. I'd find myself driving to and from work, and I was just in tears all the time. And so I went to the doctor, and they prescribed me a medication. And I'm not knocking the medications. If it helps you, that's wonderful, but I can tell you that this medication did not do what I needed it to do. I needed to still be able to function like a normal human being. Unfortunately, this medication did not do that for me. It took away my sadness, but it took away my happiness. It took away everything. I was a walking zombie. I had no emotions at all. And I wasn't on it for too long before I realized that that was not the person that I wanted to be. I didn't want to be someone who didn't show care or concern for my child. Wanted her to know that I loved her, even if that means crying in front of her. I wanted her to know that I love her, as well as my other children. So I stopped taking the medication. I didn't do it the way you're supposed to. You're supposed to wean yourself off, and I didn't. I just stopped taking it, and which is bad. I know, but I did, and it's the past, and I just know that for me, those medications don't work. At least that one didn't, and since then I've been kind of like, I'm good. I'm trying any of those. Instead, I talk to God. So whether or not you believe in God, that's your choice. Me, I do, and I know He exists, and He gives me a lot of comfort every single day. All right, so Trinity went through, and she got her first round of chemo. Prior to her chemo, she got her Broviac put in. That would have been her very first Broviac, and then she was released from the hospital. It was a pretty short stay. By March 1st of 2006, however, she ended up back in the hospital. She spiked a high fever. When we called the doctor to let them know, they said to bring her right in. And so we did. She'd already had the chemo, and now she's sick. Once you're sick, once you start chemo, and if you get sick, they want you to come to the hospital right away, especially for a child. So we did. Found out that she had an infection in her Broviac. So it was in her blood, but it originated from her Broviac. I'm going to try to put some pictures here of what a Broviac is. I think I did in the prior video, but I just want to be absolutely sure that everybody knows what it is. So on the 10th, so 10 days later, after trying to fight the infection, with medication. After 10 days, they finally realized that, hey, with the Broviac still in place, the infection isn't going anywhere, so we have to pull it. So it's another surgery, and they had to pull the Broviac out. The issue with that was Tren, her veins were super tiny. Sorry, my son. Her veins were super tiny and delicate, and an IV would only last about 24 hours if we were lucky with her before her vein would collapse. And so if she had to have an IV, usually it started from one arm to the next arm to the legs to the neck to the head. I mean, places you never thought you could even get an IV, she got IVs. So, but they didn't last. So on the 14th, so 14 days out, 4 days after the Broviac was pulled, 14 days of being in the hospital, they went ahead and they put a PICC line in, which I plan to put information on PICC line here. They tried to put it in her ankles during the surgery, but that didn't work out, so it ended up in her arm. So the poor thing ended up with bruised up ankles and arm. On the 17th, so 17 days of being in the hospital, she was released, which was awesome, and she got to come home, which meant the infection was gone. Yay. That was also the day we had our, I don't know if it was our first bone marrow transplant doctor visit, but we had an appointment with the bone marrow transplant doctor, which they were amazing, loved them, great people, the whole staff, they were awesome. Unfortunately, I guess it's not unfortunate, they were very, very honest. So if you don't like honesty, you didn't want to see this doctor, but she was honest, and I would actually prefer honesty. So even when it's hard to hear. So she told us at that time that Tren only had a 20 to 30% chance of survival. She also told us that if she did survive and grow into a young woman, she would have a lot of problems. She had a very poor chance of growing healthy. She'd never be able to have children of her own. She had a very high chance of secondary cancers due to her medications, the chemo, the radiation, going through all that. She had a chance of having physical and mental growth and abilities being altered due to the JMML and the medications. Also, they told us that they were still looking for a match. They haven't found one yet. On March 29th, or March 19th, me and Angel ended up having to go to my mom's house because we were sick, and we had to stay there until the 21st because Tren was home, and we did not want to get her sick. So we actually had to leave, and Mark stayed and took care of her. On the 22nd, Trinity had surgery to put in a brand new Broviac, and we got to come home to be with her. Thankfully, our colds were gone. But on the 24th, so 2 days later, Tren ended up back in the hospital again. But this time, it wasn't because she was sick. She had to have her second round of chemo. But I did get to be with her, which is awesome. This time, she got sick. The first time around, it didn't really affect her too much as far as she didn't lose any hair. She was a little nauseous, but nothing crazy. This time, it kicked her butt this time. This time, she was very sick. But we found out that her spleen had shrunk, which was amazing news because with JMML, they have enlarged spleens and liver. And usually with these kids, a lot of times they talk about removing the spleen. They didn't end up doing that with her. They did talk about it, but because it had shrunk, that was taken off the table. It was something that they didn't have to do. During this time, they also taught us how to do her mouth care. She had a few teeth, but she didn't have a full mouth of teeth yet, but she needed this mouth care because of the chemo. So it was a special kind of it was actually a mouthwash, toothpaste type thing all in one, but it was all liquids. You put on a little sponge dauber thing and went through her mouth with it. She hated it. She also had to have eye drops because of the chemo with the dry eyes, and so she had eye drops. Nausea meds, obviously, because chemo. Also, she had to have her diapers changed very, very frequently. So if she urinated, it needed to be changed immediately because the chemo actually comes out in the urine and it will burn the skin. So those are things that we learned. On March 28th, Tren unhooked her Broviac. I was asleep in the room, so I was right there with her, but I was crashed out. And so she unhooked her Broviac and got blood everywhere. And it was actually one of the nurses that found it. Thank the good Lord. And I woke up to 2 nurses in the room, cleaning her up and cleaning the bed up, and not having any idea what the heck just happened until I stood up and looked around and seen blood everywhere. And they told me, hey, chill out, it's all good. She's fine, you know. She didn't lose enough blood to worry about. She's all right. But they did start taping them better. So, because she was little, but she still figured out how to do it. So, on March 28th, she had her last dose of chemo for that round, and she got to come home. On the 31st, we had another bone marrow transplant doctor appointment, where we found out that myself and Mark were not a match for her. So they did test us, however, she was exactly 50-50 when it came to us. She wasn't more one than the other, and they needed a match that was even closer. But we did find out during this visit that she had a marker in her that was of Asian descent, and found out that that marker actually came from me. And so then the doctor asked, you know, who in your family is Asian? And what part of the world did they come from? She wanted to know so she could actually look in that part of the world for a donor. However, when I asked both sides of my family, nobody knows. No one knows. So, never figured that one out. Okay, so at that appointment, she also needed to have a blood transfer because her counts were really low. On April 3rd, Trinity ended up with a fever again, 102. Her heartbeats per minute were at 200, so she was admitted into Phoenix Children's. And again, she had another infection in her Broviac. On the 4th, so the very next day, Trinity wouldn't even sit up. She was doing the just lay down and moan thing. She had no energy. She felt awful, which was really rare for her, because even going through chemo and all the rest, sorry, I'm rubbing my hands together again, I did that in the last video. So even with going through chemo and everything else, usually she wanted to play, she still had some energy to get up and do stuff, you know. At this time, she didn't have that. She was sick. She felt awful. Her counts were really low again. She had to have another blood and platelet transfer this time. Due to the infection in her Broviac, they put her on a 10-day regimen of antibiotics. On the 5th, the nutritionist came to see her. She told me that Trin was underweight. She wanted to put a feeding tube into Trinity since Trinity wasn't eating enough. I actually talked her out of it because I thought Trinity was dealing with enough tubes and everything else, and I knew that as soon as the nausea was gone that she would start to eat again. And so the nutritionist said, you know, she'd give me, you know, a few more days to see how things went. At that same day on the 5th, the doctors took a blood sample from her head and her Broviac, so like, you know, her head and her Broviac to test them both, and they found out that she was positive for infections in both areas, which meant that the infection was all over her body. So they gave her another platelet transfer, and also they found out that she had the flu. So, you know, she felt like Dookie, big time Dookie. On April 7th, they ended up removing her Broviac again to get rid of the infection because nothing else was working. The infectious disease doctor came to see me, and she told me that, he told me, you know, told me that she had a very, very rare type of infection, which was common for Trin. If it was rare, that's what she got, because, you know, if it wasn't rare, she didn't want that. Okay, that's not the truth, but that's what it seemed like. That's Mark. So she had a very, very rare infection. Let's see. So Trin had to start getting IVs again, which I've already told you was always such a joy. On April 9th, the nurses ended up having to put socks on both of Trin's hands because she kept pulling the IVs out, which I actually have a photo of. So I'll put that here. Yeah, so she didn't like them. They didn't feel good, so she'd pull them out. On April 15th was Easter of that year, and it was Trent's second Easter. The first one, she was only a few months old. This one, she was actually old enough to, look for eggs and everything, but she was stuck in a hospital. So both my parents and Mark's parents, brought her plastic eggs, an Easter bunny, and an Easter basket, and she did the little Easter egg hunting thing from her room. On the 17th of April, they put a PICC line in. On the 18th, the PICC line gave out, and so it had to be removed, and she was back to IVs. On the 20th, they put in a new Broviac. On the 24th, so 4 days after they put in the Broviac, they moved Trent to a room with a girl who was 12 years old who was in the hospital and was positive for C. diff, which is a contagious bacterial infection. So I'm not sure if any of you understand this, but Trent obviously can pick up infections from like the air and anywhere, and then they put her in a room with somebody who's got a contagious infection. Didn't make any sense to me. I'm gonna guess it probably doesn't make any sense to you either. And so I actually said something. I stood up and was like, hey y'all, this don't make no sense. Why are you doing this? And the explanation that I was given was that she's in diapers and the other girl uses the actual restroom, and so the infection can't be transferred from one to the other. And then I said, well, what happens when I go into that bathroom to rinse out some of my daughter's stuff, because it's a shared bathroom, and I wash my hands, but the girl didn't wash hers very good, and she touched the door. Now I just touched the door, and then I go and doing whatever, changing my daughter's diaper, getting her a bottle, whatever it is. What happens then? And that's when the light bulb went off, and they're like, yeah, okay, we're gonna move her. So they did. The 25th, Trent ended up with a fever of 104. Her blood pressure was actually low, although her heart rate was at 211 beats per minute. So I don't really understand that, but that's what I had wrote down at the time. That might be wrong. But they found bacteria in her blood again. Yet on the 27th, they decided to go ahead and move forward with the chemo. And so she started her third round of chemo on the 27th. So she hadn't even been out the hospital yet. I believe, if I look back, let's see here. At this point, Trinity went back into the hospital on March 24th to start her second round of chemo, right? And now we are down to April 27th. She's still in the hospital. She hasn't come home. On the 28th, Trinity got put in isolation because she now, at that point on the 28th, she tested positive for 3 different bacterias. So she had 3 different bacterias that were growing in her. On the 29th of April, Trent finished her chemo, and at that day we found out, that Trinity would be the very first JMML child to receive a transplant at Phoenix Children's Hospital. And they were very excited about this. Myself and Mark were not as excited about this. That scared the crap out of us. But we didn't really have any choices. We didn't feel like we did, and so we said, all right, okay, and just prayed that they knew what they were doing. And they did. They seemed to do really good. All in all, I know that they loved her, so okay, back on track. On May 2nd, a nutritionist started giving Trent a new type of drink. It was called Resource. It's kind of like a meal in a can, and she actually liked it. She also started to walk that day using the IV pole. That's how she started to walk. She was almost 17 months old. Everything with Trent was delayed. Like with my other girls, they all started walking. They both started walking pretty early. Trent, it took her all this time. But using that IV pole, she's walking around that room. That same day on May 2nd, when Mark and the kids came to visit, as they were starting to leave, Heaven broke down in tears, crying that she wanted her baby sister home. She wanted her mom home. She was tired of her sister being in the hospital. She was just done with it. And it broke my heart to see her heart broke like that, and to know that there was nothing that I could do to make it better. She loved her little sister so very, very much. And Trinity really didn't like to see Heaven leaving either, or Angel. That same day, the doctor came to see us about Trin's radiation and let us know that Trin was going to have full body radiation 2 times a day for 3 days in a row prior to her bone marrow transplant. He also advised us that the complications of radiation included hormonal problems, developmental problems, lung problems, future tumors, and future leukemia in a different nature. So that was a fun conversation. So on May 13th, Trin had another bacterial infection found. That's also the day she started to walk without holding on to anything. Still in the hospital, so she learned how to walk in the hospital. On the 28th, May 28th, she had another bacterial infection found. This one was different than the one that was found on the 13th. On June 1st, I found the side of the crib was left down by a nurse. It started a 4-day routine. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Let me start that one over. It's late. I'm tired. Sorry. Okay, so on June 1st, nurse left the side of the crib down.
How about the other
Okay.
one?
That was also the day that Trent started a 4-day routine to have shots put in her legs for her to produce extra stem cells. That was a lot to get out. So they wanted her to produce extra stem cells so that way they could harvest them. So if she needed them later. So on this day, on June 1st, they started to give her those extra shots to produce the extra stem cells. On the 3rd, so 2 days later, the side of the crib was left down again by a nurse. That always pisses me off. Okay. On June 5th, Trent had surgery to put in a harvest stem cell line. And I was warned by the doctor prior to going back and seeing her that it looked large, for me to not be shocked, but it didn't matter. By the time we got back there, we were shocked. It looked like she had a freaking garden hose sticking out of the side of her neck. That damn thing was huge. And yeah, it freaked me out. Freaked Mark out too. It was horrible. But they were able to harvest 3 times the amount of the stem cells that they needed. The plan for these it was for an emergency only. If her transplant didn't go well, then they could give these back to her. It would be introducing the JMML again. However, it would save her life. So that's what it was. It was to be used in a life or death situation only. And then they removed it, and So on June 7th, Trent was taken to Good Sam Hospital via an ambulance for measurements and wait for radiation, because they have to have everything 110% correct. I know 110. Okay, 100% correct. They can't be off. We're talking about full body. We're talking about radiation here. Radiation's a big deal. It's dangerous, super duper dangerous. So, they had to be right. So they took her weight, and her measurements, and they wouldn't let us take her because she was, admitted into the hospital. So she's kind of hospital property, I guess, or whatever. Right then, they're in charge of her. So she couldn't go in our vehicle. They had to take her by ambulance, which was still okay because Trent absolutely loved being able to leave the room. She could leave the hospital, so she was able to see sunlight and to see birds and to see people and to see cars and all the stuff that we normally take for granted from day to day. She was able to see and just loved. She was so happy being out of that room. So, on June 12th, Trin ended up with another infection. It was her, and her Broviac was cracked, so she had a crack in it. So they had to remove it anyway. And that day they decided to postpone her transplant because of these things going on. On June 13th, Trinity found out that when you push the little red emergency button on the wall, that just happened to be right behind her, right behind her crib, that when you push that little button, that she would get a whole lot of visitors. And she really liked visitors, and so she kept doing it. She must have done it 3 or 4 times before they finally just moved her crib. Smart girl. On June 18th, Trinity got released from the hospital finally to be able to come home. It was 1 day shy of being in the hospital for 11 weeks straight. When she came home, she didn't have a Broviac, and she had no medications. So it was like she was just a regular toddler for the first time in her life. She was a regular toddler. She came home and she got into the cabinets and she messed around with the Tupperware, and she got to go swimming, and she got to play with her sisters without worrying about pulling on her Broviac or anything else, and she got to sleep like normal without being woken up numerous times to take meds, and it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. On June 26th, she had to go back into the hospital to have a new Broviac put in. On June 27th, so the next day after having her Broviac put in, Trinity got her first dose of full body radiation. And she had it done twice a day for 3 days. And we do have video of this, so I'll put that here. And Trent took this doll and purse that I got her to each one of her sessions. And it was scary. For me and Mark, it was very, very scary. Because they would put her to sleep, you know, right before they would do the radiation. And it was very scary. But, I mean, it all worked out. She came out okay. It scared us, you know. 29th of June, that was her last day of full body radiation. And her bone marrow transplant was scheduled for July 3rd. So we were just getting ready for that. She was in the hospital, you know, she was in a room where she's pretty much isolated because her immune system, she didn't have one. She had no immune system because you have the chemo and then the radiation, that's what it does. It knocks out your immune system. So, yeah, so she's in a room with just us.
Blinded by the light, and I can barely see. And all I want is to see your face. Blinded by the light. Take flight, make it right. Now I'm gonna start a fight. Break down, now I found a simple smile.
Ooh, don't like that.
I'm so wrong.
Hi, Trinity.
All I am.
Ooh, are you gonna kick Daddy's butt? Hi, sweetheart.
Blinded by the light,
We're all done.
and I can barely breathe.
Does that tickle your nose?
All I
Does that tickle your nose?
is to see your
Yeah,
face.
you feel that, huh?
Welcome back, precious.
Yeah.
All done.
Some good stuff, isn't it?
Her toe thing.
so she's in a room with just us. But on the 29th, let's see, nope, not the 29th. Okay, July 3rd. Reading notes. On July 3rd, Trinity got her bone marrow transplant. And the hospital really does celebrate this. I mean, it's almost like another birthday for these kids. You know, the way they write it on the boards and the celebration, yay. Trinity, however, felt like total crap. She was in a lot of pain. Bone pain, her joints, she had a sore throat, she had sores in her mouth, her butt was full of sores and it was raw. She did not feel good. Not at all. On July 4th, you know, holiday, she's still in the hospital, and unfortunately she couldn't see any of the fireworks because she's in the hospital and the window that she had didn't look out. You know, I don't think she would have given a crud anyway because she was still really sick. On July 7th, her blood pressure rise to the point that she needed to have medication to lower it. They started her on a patch that would give the medication really slowly over time. Unfortunately, the patch has to be replaced every day, and the removal of the patch hurt her a lot. It was like ripping off the first layer of skin, and it was very painful to her. I hated having to do that. On July 10th, she ended up with another infection. She had a high fever and a rash on her legs, and the doctors were extremely worried because she had no immune system. On July 17th, her mouth and butt started to heal after 3 weeks of being messed up. They finally started to heal. On the 18th, I had to go home and leave her because I had a cold, and I felt awful having to leave her, but it was for her own good. That same day, I got a call from the doctor that Trin tested positive for roseola virus. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I'll put the information up now just in case. And we were told that it was really, really dangerous for her, because everything that wouldn't be that big of a deal for me or you at this point for her was super duper dangerous. So, you know, she was in isolation by herself and still ended up with this damn virus. Now, roseola virus, it's a common viral infection in young children. It causes fever and rash. It spreads by air, respiratory droplets, so sneezes or coughs, kissing, by saliva drinks, skin-to-skin contact, so by touching contaminated surfaces, even a blanket. On July 27th, Trin ended up having graft versus host disease, which is a flippin' sucky disease for anybody who's got to have any kind of transplant. It's where your graft is attacking your body as though your body is the outsider. So yeah, she was running a really high fever on and off for days. Her face and body got super swollen. Anyway, so graft versus host is a condition that occurs when donor bone marrow or stem cells attack the recipient. Graft versus host disease can occur at any time after a transplant. However, it's common after the marrow has started to make healthy cells. So there's a positive for you. That means it started to make healthy cells. Okay, it's kicking your butt, but it's making healthy cells. The condition can be mild or severe. Symptoms vary based on how long someone has had the condition, but may include mouth ulcers, abdominal pain, and rash. Treatments include medication to suppress the immune system, such as steroids. And guess what steroids do? They make you gain a lot of weight. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do for today. I'm sorry, I know that this is a long video. I'm just trying to get the information out there. I'm really hoping that it will help somebody somewhere. And And I know that you would probably like to find out all of the story in one shot, but this is going to be a little bit of a series, so please hang in there with me. I will get this done as soon as I can. It is a lot more work than I thought it would be. So please just hang in there with me, and I will see you again soon with video number 3. Have a great day. Bye. Please like and share so that this can get to someone if they need it. You know, thank you. Bye.
And all I had, memory, blinded by